Every memory you cling to is a chain around your mind. The regrets you replay aren't lessons, they are prisons. Your past is whispering, convincing you that it still controls you. And until you see it clearly, it does. There is a quiet power in understanding this. Those who can step outside their past move unseen, unshakable, and untouchable. By the time you finish this, your thoughts will no longer betray your presence. You will learn to observe yourself as others cannot. The past is not a simple record of events. It is a living filter through which the mind interprets reality. Most people believe they remember objectively, but memory is selective, distorted, and emotionally charged. Every recollection carries layers of interpretation, fear, and unprocessed emotion. This is why individuals repeatedly react to situations not as they are, but as they were. They carry yesterday into today, often unconsciously, allowing old events to dictate new behavior. The mind, left unchecked, will insist on reliving old mistakes, failures, or losses as if they are still happening, whispering doubts and insecurities in every decision. Few recognize this, and even fewer understand how subtly it undermines autonomy, presence, and power. Awareness begins with acknowledging that memory is not reality. It is a lens that can distort, exaggerate, or suppress truth. Each emotion triggered by the past is optional, not inevitable, and recognizing this distinction is the first step toward mastery. When you notice a reaction born from memory, do not resist it emotionally, but observe it with precision. See the impulse as a signal, not a command. In that moment, you reclaim authority over your behavior and responses. Strategic restraint emerges when you consistently separate past influence from present action. The elite do not deny memories, they study them, extract patterns, and then decide consciously whether to allow them into their actions. This process transforms memory from a cage into a tool, offering insight without surrendering control. Emotional clarity grows from the practice of observing without attachment, treating memories as data rather than verdicts. When the brain no longer interprets past events as mandates, it stops reacting impulsively, stops replaying regrets, and stops granting power to experiences that no longer exist. Mastery of this dynamic is not achieved overnight. It is cultivated through deliberate, repeated attention to the interplay between memory and emotion. Those who ignore it remain chained to outdated patterns, visible and predictable to those who understand human behavior. Those who master it operate silently, their minds unconquerable, their actions precise. They understand that freedom is not external, it is internal, cultivated through awareness, observation, and the disciplined management of thought. Every decision becomes deliberate rather than reactive, every moment present rather than burdened, and every interaction strategic rather than predictable. The brain, once a prisoner of its own past, becomes an instrument of power, precision, and calm control, offering clarity where others see chaos and authority where others see circumstance. Memory is not evidence, it is interpretation, and this distinction separates the aware from the perpetually trapped. Most people believe that what they remember is an objective truth, a factual account of events that defines their experiences. They trust these recollections as if they were unchangeable laws, using them to justify fear, resentment, or limitation. Yet the brain is not a passive recorder, it is an active editor, constantly reshaping experiences to make them make sense, to fit emotional patterns, to protect identity, and to validate existing beliefs. A slight insult can be magnified into a trauma, a small failure can become a defining narrative, and a neutral situation can transform into betrayal. This is why some remain frozen in patterns they no longer need, acting as if the past is present, reacting not to reality but to memory's distortion of it. Understanding this is critical for those seeking mastery over themselves and their surroundings. To operate at a higher level, one must treat every memory as a hypothesis rather than an immutable truth. Each recollection must be examined critically, not through denial, but through observation. What emotions arise when a memory surfaces? What assumptions is the mind layering over events? Which impulses are truly yours, and which are borrowed from a distorted past? The unaware follow these impulses automatically, allowing old pain, old shame, or old fear to dictate decisions, interactions, and even identity. The strategic, however, step outside this loop. They see memory as a tool, a source of data, insight, and foresight, but never as a master. When a memory triggers anxiety or regret, they observe it without surrender, dissecting the layers of distortion to uncover the underlying signal. This transforms reaction into choice, chaos into calculation. They recognize that feelings about the past are not commands, they are indicators, offering information that can be used or ignored at will. By practicing this discipline, the mind gradually rewires itself, responding to present circumstances with clarity rather than reflex, with strategy rather than habit. The aware do not become cold or detached, they become precise. They navigate relationships, challenges, and decisions with an almost invisible authority because they are no longer shackled by memory-driven narratives. Others remain predictable, guided by shadows of what happened long ago. The elite operate from a space of detachment and clarity where past events are observed, analyzed, and transformed into tools of insight. They understand that true power lies in choosing which memories influence their identity, which grudges deserve attention, and which fears are irrelevant to the now. This is mastery in its quietest forms, the ability to step out of the story your mind insists on retelling and act freely, deliberately, and strategically in the moment, unseen by those still enslaved to yesterday. Regret is the most subtle form of control, quietly commanding attention and energy, while presenting itself as reflection or self-improvement. Most people mistake it for wisdom, believing that replaying mistakes or lost opportunities is necessary for growth. In reality, regret is a chain disguised as contemplation. Every moment spent reliving what could have been strengthens the grip of past events on the present. The mind becomes preoccupied with alternatives that never existed, constructing elaborate scenarios of failure or missed advantage that serve no purpose other than to keep the individual reactive, insecure, and emotionally exposed. Few recognize that these impulses are optional, that they are not mandates of morality, learning, or consequence, but habitual scripts that the mind repeats unconsciously. The elite understand that regret is a signal, not a command, a reflection of the past, yes, but never a law of action. Emotional energy devoted to regret is power diverted. Those who surrender to it unknowingly hand influence over to yesterday, allowing memories to dictate interactions, decisions, and even identity. Mastery begins when one observes regret without attachment, analyzing its structure and origin instead of internalizing its narrative. What is the event being recalled? What emotion is being amplified? What assumptions about self or others are being repeated? By dissecting these layers with quiet attention, the individual shifts from being a victim of memory to being its analyst, extracting insight while withholding authority. Strategic minds use regret as a tool, not a chain. They allow the memory to inform, to warn, to highlight patterns, but they never allow it to dominate action or perception. This transforms regret from a trap into a guide, from a source of weakness into a source of refined awareness. Over time, this practice rewires the brain's habitual responses, reducing the automatic pull of past mistakes and increasing deliberate control over present behavior. Decision-making becomes grounded in observation, clarity, and timing rather than impulse or unresolved emotion. Those who cannot master regret remain predictable, emotionally transparent, and reactive, while those who do move with a quiet, unshakable authority that is invisible to the unaware. The elite operate with precision because they have stripped memory of its coercive power, allowing only the information that serves strategy and growth. In this space, past mistakes exist, but they do not define identity, limit potential, or dictate behavior. Every decision is deliberate, every reaction measured, and every interaction guided by self-possession rather than by emotional echoes. Regret, once the master, becomes the servant, offering wisdom without control, observation without attachment, and insight without surrender. This is the transformation of thought that separates those who live under the weight of history from those who navigate it with calm, calculated dominance, unseen and untouchable by forces that still enslave the majority. Emotional attachment to the past is one of the most subtle, pervasive forms of obedience the human mind can experience. It does not announce itself with loud alarms or overt commands. It operates quietly, whispering in the background of perception, shaping responses and decisions without conscious consent. Most individuals believe they act freely, yet they remain guided by the memories, emotions, and unresolved experiences they carry. Every instance of anger over an old betrayal, fear of repeating a failure, or longing for a lost opportunity represents the mind's unconscious submission to what is no longer present. The past becomes a hidden authority, and the unaware follow its dictates without realizing it. Few recognize that this obedience is not a reflection of weakness in character, but of unexamined mental patterns. The elite, by contrast, see this clearly. They understand that to operate at a higher level, one must distinguish between the events themselves and the authority the mind grants them. Memories are information, not mandates. Emotions are signals, not commands. This distinction is the foundation of strategic mental autonomy. Emotional attachment to the past is also deeply intertwined with identity. People often define themselves by what happened, by what they endured, or by what they lost. They construct narratives in which their sense of self is inseparable from past experiences, and they defend these narratives as if their very existence depends upon them. The unaware allow this framework to dictate their behavior, their social interactions, and their sense of worth. In contrast, mastery emerges when identity is recognized as fluid, constructed consciously rather than imposed unconsciously. By observing the impulses and judgments that arise from past events, the elite reclaim the space between stimulus and response. This space, invisible to most, is where power resides. It is where choice is exercised deliberately, where reactions are measured, and where influence over self is absolute. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the management of feeling. It allows insight without surrender, perception without distortion, and presence without distraction. Those who cannot achieve this remain predictable, their minds legible to anyone who understands human behavior. Those who can operate in this way move through the world with an authority that is subtle but unassailable. Silence becomes a strategic tool, not just in communication but in thought. The mind, once freed from the constant pull of memory-driven attachment, gains clarity, foresight, and control. Decisions are no longer reactive but deliberate. Timing is chosen, not imposed by habit or past trauma. Social interactions are navigated with precision because reactions are not dictated by unresolved history but by calculated observation. Awareness of the past's influence also transforms power dynamics. People attached to memory unconsciously broadcast vulnerability, signaling to others when they can be provoked, manipulated, or controlled. The elite, having stripped the past of its authority, become unreadable. They are seen but not known, understood only on their terms, and untouchable in ways that others cannot anticipate. This mastery requires consistent practice, observing every emotional response, analyzing the origin of impulses, and deciding consciously which mental energies deserve attention. It is not a single act but a process, a continuous refinement of thought, perception, and behavior. In this space, the past exists as a reference, never as a governor. Memory informs strategy rather than dictates action. Reflection replaces regret. Silence replaces chaos. Observation replaces impulsivity. In reclaiming authority over what once controlled them, the mind becomes an instrument of calm, deliberate power, capable of navigating every challenge, decision, and interaction with precision. The unaware remain shackled, their lives echoing with events long gone. The prepared move unseen, untouchable, and quietly dominant, their presence a statement of mastery that requires no declaration, only execution. Silence in thought is one of the most underestimated forms of power. The majority of minds are endlessly noisy, cluttered with commentary, judgment, and replayed scenarios that have no bearing on the present. Most people cannot step outside the constant mental chatter long enough to observe it, to notice the impulses, biases, and emotional distortions that guide every decision they make. Their reactions are automatic, their emotions visible, and their patterns predictable. Those who have mastered thought understand that silence is not emptiness, it is clarity. It is the space where awareness expands and where observation sharpens and where strategy is forged. In silence, the mind gains the ability to separate signal from noise, to discern between what demands action and what can be ignored, to recognize which impulses are rooted in reality and which are echoes of memory, fear, or social conditioning. The unaware respond to life as it unfolds, as if they are at the mercy of circumstance, constantly chasing emotional validation or avoiding imagined threats. Their minds betray them in ways that are visible to anyone who understands human behavior. In contrast, those who cultivate internal silence develop a presence that is difficult to read, their actions measured, and their authority quiet but undeniable. Silence is not merely the absence of thought, it is the deliberate management of thought. It allows observation without interference, understanding without emotional distortion, and influence without exposure. Every impulse can be studied, every memory analyzed, every decision calibrated. The elite operate in this space because it allows them to respond rather than react, and to act without revealing intentions. In practical terms, silence strengthens control over perception. When a person's mind is noisy, they project it outward. Others can sense the tension, the distraction, or the unresolved emotion. This is why most individuals are easily manipulated, provoked, or predicted. They broadcast themselves constantly through thought and expression. The strategic, however, maintain a private mental landscape. Their reactions are minimal, their expressions deliberate, and their presence unshakable. They reveal only what they choose, keeping influence over themselves absolute and influence over others uncertain. Silence also heightens awareness of timing, one of the most powerful tools in human interaction. While the majority of people act impulsively, reacting immediately to stimuli, the silent observer measures the rhythm of situations, reads micro-patterns, and acts precisely when advantage is maximized. This quiet control transforms not only individual decisions, but social and professional influence. When a person learns to hold mental silence consistently, they develop patience that is strategic, not passive, and perception that is precise, not distorted. Emotional responses lose their grip, and impulses driven by fear, insecurity, or past events are neutralized. This creates a state where almost every action is deliberate, almost every reaction calculated, and almost every interaction navigated with authority. Silence in thought is also the foundation of unshakable confidence. Most people speak to be heard, to defend, or to reassure themselves. The elite do not need this. Their silence signals mastery because it reflects control over internal narratives and external behavior simultaneously. It allows observation of power dynamics without participation in the chaos, providing insight that others cannot access because they are lost in their own mental noise. Over time, this practice rewires perception itself. The silent mind sees opportunities that the noisy mind misses, interprets threats before they are obvious, and maintains authority without confrontation. In social, professional, or personal spheres, this translates into influence that is invisible but absolute. The unaware remain exposed, their thoughts and emotions legible to anyone skilled enough to read them. The disciplined operate with a quiet dominance, unprovoked, unpredicted, and unseen, controlling outcomes without resistance. Mastery of silence in thought is not achieved through avoidance, meditation alone, or detachment from life. It is cultivated through deliberate observation of one's impulses, consistent practice of restraint, and relentless attention to the interplay between thought, memory, and emotion. Every moment of mental noise resisted strengthens clarity. Every observation without reaction reinforces strategy, and every controlled response builds a presence that is virtually untouchable. The brain, once noisy and reactive, becomes an instrument of calculated influence, precise timing, and quiet authority. In this state, external chaos cannot penetrate, internal impulses cannot dominate, and every decision, interaction, or perception is governed by deliberate mastery rather than accident. Your identity is being shaped by what you remember, not by what is real. Most people carry the illusion that who they are is fixed, defined by accomplishments, failures, or experiences from the past. They believe that the events they have lived through dictate the boundaries of their personality, their choices, and even their potential. This is why patterns repeat, why mistakes echo, and why the majority of people remain predictably trapped in cycles they do not understand. Memory acts as both filter and architect. It selectively preserves certain events, emphasizes particular emotions, and organizes them into a narrative that the individual accepts as self-definition. Those who fail to notice this surrender control over their own identity, allowing old experiences to dominate current behavior, decision-making, and interpersonal interactions. They unconsciously allow themselves to be driven by events that no longer exist, shaping their present through the lens of the past rather than through deliberate intention. In contrast, mastery begins when identity is recognized as fluid, constructed, and subject to conscious shaping. The elite understand that the self is not a passive product of memory, it is an ongoing project of observation, decision, and refinement. By carefully analyzing the impulses, fears, and assumptions that arise from memory, they distinguish between the influences that are useful and those that are harmful. They extract lessons without granting authority, allowing insight to inform strategy without allowing old patterns to dictate action. Every reaction is measured, every decision deliberate, and every presentation of self-controlled. This is not detachment or inauthenticity, it is the conscious management of influence over oneself and over perception. Identity, once freed from the chains of memory, becomes a tool of strategic power. Those who can construct their self-concept consciously operate in a space where others cannot anticipate, manipulate, or define them. They become unreadable because the scripts that govern most people's behavior, the echoes of praise, failure, or betrayal, no longer hold sway. Observing identity in this way requires consistent introspection and disciplined awareness. One must monitor the thoughts, reactions, and emotional impulses that arise in each interaction, examining whether they reflect authentic choice or unconscious repetition. This process reveals the subtle ways the past continues to dictate behavior, overreactions to criticism, defensive postures in conversation, hesitation in decision-making, or overcompensation in social interactions. By recognizing these patterns, the strategic mind can interrupt automatic responses and replace them with deliberate, calibrated actions. This allows presence to be fully realized in each moment, rather than fragmented by history. The elite also understand that identity shapes perception, not merely action. People see the world and others through the lens of who they believe themselves to be. If that lens is distorted by memory, fear, or insecurity, perception is compromised. By consciously shaping identity, perception sharpens. The mind can interpret events and intentions without distortion, analyze threats and opportunities without bias, and act with foresight and precision. Emotional control is inseparable from this process. Memory-driven identity is emotional, reactive, and transparent. Conscious identity is calm, deliberate, and opaque. The more one shapes identity actively, the less vulnerable one becomes to manipulation, provocation, or projection by others. Timing, influence, and authority emerge naturally because the self is stable internally while fluid externally. The elite are not constrained by old reputations, outdated narratives, or unexamined experiences. They choose which aspects of themselves are visible, which traits are expressed, and which impulses are acted upon. The past informs but does not govern, the present is directed with intentionality, and the future is approached with calculated flexibility. Those who remain unconsciously attached to memory are predictable, reactive, and exposed. Those who actively shape identity move unseen, operate strategically, and remain untouchable in ways that the unaware cannot comprehend. Mastery of identity is therefore both internal and external. Internally, it is a constant process of observation, reflection, and recalibration. Externally, it is a subtle display of presence, authority, and control, communicated not through force, volume, or aggression, but through the quiet consistency of deliberate action. Every choice becomes intentional, every response measured, and every interaction an exercise of strategic awareness. In freeing identity from the past, the brain gains clarity, flexibility, and influence, transforming memory from a cage into a map, from limitation into precision, from chaos into calm authority. Those who understand this principle operate at a level invisible to most, navigating social, emotional, and professional landscapes with unshakable poise and strategic supremacy, while the majority remain trapped, predictable, and legible to anyone who knows the language of memory, emotion, and identity. Time is one of the most misunderstood dimensions of human perception. Most people live as if the past, present, and future exist independently, sequentially, and inevitably. They behave as though yesterday is still happening and tomorrow is already determined, giving power to events that are neither active nor guaranteed. This illusion is the source of endless anxiety, distraction, and vulnerability. The unaware react to ghosts of the past and shadows of imagined futures, surrendering authority to memory and speculation. They replay failures, relive regrets, and anticipate threats that do not exist, leaving their minds fragmented and their actions predictable. In contrast, mastery emerges when one understands that time is not a strict linear path, but a constructive perception, a series of potential reactions, and a framework in which strategy is exercised. The elite recognize that the past is nothing more than data, the present is the only space in which action can be taken, and the future is a set of probabilities that can be influenced, but never fully controlled. Awareness of this principle transforms memory from a prison into a tool. Every recollection becomes an observation, every regret becomes insight, and every success becomes a lesson for calibration. Those who fail to grasp this remain slaves to repetition, bound by the emotional and cognitive weight of events that no longer have authority. The strategic individual, however, reframes each temporal dimension. Memory informs without commanding. The present is where influence is exerted, and the future is approached with calculated flexibility. Understanding this allows the mind to operate in a state of calm clarity, where impulses are measured, emotions are observed, and decisions are deliberate rather than reactive. Conscious manipulation of temporal perception is also a source of social power. Most people's behavior signals what they value, fear, and expect because their reactions are tethered to unresolved past experiences or projected futures. The elite, by contrast, operate outside these predictable patterns. They understand the rhythms of cause and effect and observe the flow of events without becoming ensnared in them. Their responses are neither hurried nor delayed unnecessarily. They act when timing offers maximal advantage, and they withhold action when patience amplifies impact. In this way, mastery over time becomes mastery over influence itself. The brain, once reactive to memory and speculation, transforms into an instrument of strategy capable of navigating complexity while remaining impervious to distraction. The elite also understand the role of perception in shaping temporal authority. Time is only threatening to those who believe they are bound by it. When one sees each moment as a space of choice, the illusion of past dominance and future uncertainty diminishes. This shift allows for a mental flexibility that is invisible to the unaware. They operate with foresight because their observation is free of distortion, their decisions are informed rather than emotional, and their influence is derived from presence rather than assertion. Control over temporal perception is inseparable from control over self. Impulses rooted in fear, regret, or anticipation are neutralized through conscious awareness. The mind that understands time as a tool rather than a master becomes unshakable, deliberate, and strategically fluid. Every decision, every reaction, and every interaction is governed by insight rather than habit. observation rather than assumption, and choice rather than compulsion. Social, professional, and personal environments are navigated with precision because the individual is neither predictable nor reactive. Patterns of behavior once imposed by memory or imagined futures are replaced by deliberate strategies that remain invisible to those who continue to live under the illusion of time. Moreover, understanding time enhances resilience. The elite do not fear setbacks because the past has no authority over present action. They do not worry about uncertainty because the future is a set of variables that can be influenced through deliberate preparation. Every outcome is approached with calculated patience, and every opportunity is seized with measured timing. This mastery produces an almost imperceptible dominance. Others sense control, confidence, and foresight without fully understanding its source. The strategic mind uses temporal awareness to shape perception, manipulate attention, and maximize influence while remaining unseen, unreadable, and untouchable. Over time, this practice rewires thought itself. The mind stops reacting to irrelevant stimuli, stops being enslaved by memory, and stops surrendering energy to imagined scenarios. Mental clarity expands, emotional volatility diminishes, and decision-making becomes precise. The elite operate in this state continuously, moving through social, professional, and personal landscapes with authority that is quiet but undeniable, timing that is invisible but perfect, and insight that is subtle but absolute. Those who remain unaware continue to be dominated by past errors, habitual patterns, and imagined futures, their lives a predictable sequence of reaction and surrender. Those who master time transform every memory into a lesson, every present moment into an instrument of influence, and every anticipated outcome into a calculated advantage. This is the ultimate exercise of strategic freedom. The past informs, the present commands, and the future yields to deliberate action. In this space, the mind becomes unassailable, the self unreadable, and every interaction, decision, and outcome governed by quiet, unshakable mastery. The brain, once trapped by memory and speculation, evolves into a tool of power, precision, and calm dominance, navigating existence with clarity that others can neither perceive nor anticipate. Like or subscribe for more lessons in quiet power. The mind that lives in the past is never free. The one who understands this is never caught.